What is up, guys? So this is episode 2 of the Flimsy Hat podcast, and today I have a guest that is from New York, specifically Queens. His name's Peter Christian. A little bit about Peter. So he is from New York. Did his undergrad at Rutgers University, followed by his grad at Lehigh. And correct me if I'm wrong. He also worked at Crayola for over 17 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's the
Yep.
Crown Company, as everybody knows it.
Yes, it is.
All righty. And then you were a founding partner and president of ESPI. So that's like an enterprise
Systems Partners, Inc.
Okay. All right. And now you kind of just you're pretty much retired, but you do business consulting still?
I do some consulting, teaching. I'm an adjunct professor at Alvernia University in Reading, Pennsylvania. Okay. And I do some podcasts and a lot of writing. I've got 2 books that I've written and published and lots of articles that are out there.
That's good to hear. It seems like as people get older, and this isn't directed towards you, but the last guy I had on too, he's like, they just write books. And it's like interesting that books, like you think of books as like when you're in high school, they're just boring. And then like, you don't want to read them or anything like that. And then like the more as I get older, I realize that maybe I should read more books. So I don't know what it is.
Yes, I can give you 2 in particular you should read. So
well, that is a question. So we will get to that.
Okay.
So what were your experiences in your youth that like kind of shaped who you are today?
Well, it was interesting growing up in a large city, New York City. It was funny because we didn't consider where we grew up to be part of New York City. We always said the city meaning Manhattan, and I grew up in Queens. But it was a very high-paced, as you can imagine, area to be. Us Northeasterners are very much on the go, and the rest of the world doesn't quite follow us all the time, particularly down here in the South now in Florida. It's a lot more slow pace, so you have to learn to control yourself. But I learned to deal with a variety of different people, as you can well imagine. Back in the day when I grew up, 60-something years ago, New York was pretty diverse then, and it's become even more diverse now. So you learn to deal with different people, different cultures, different backgrounds, and so forth, which is a great experience because you learn a lot by learning from other people who are different than you. You're similar because you grew up in the same city, but you've got different backgrounds and educational experiences and cultural differences and religious differences, and you learn to respect those and to learn from them. So it was a great growing up experience.
So you talked on like diversity, like how important in business is that, being diverse?
Very much so. It's a world economy, truly. We don't just deal in the United States, and we don't just deal in our own little regions. We deal with people from all over the place, and we've got to understand how they conduct business and how they think. Because things that we say or do can be very different than what they say or do. And in some cases, it can be an insult to them. So we have to respect that. And we also have to understand that we're not always right. In a lot of cases, the other folks have some pretty good ideas or better ideas than us. And we have to deal with that. For instance, when I was at Crayola, we dealt with the Japanese. The Japanese wanted you to place orders pretty far out, like 3 months out. And if you changed the requirements on the order, that was another 3 months. Whereas we were at Crayola responding quickly. They'd ask for something, and within a week we would have it. And they thought we were crazy because they're taking 3 months to fulfill orders, and we're doing it in like 3 days. And it didn't quite work out the way we expected it to. And also, they were very demanding on their quality. We dealt in color. Well, color has variations to it. A red can be a slightly different shade, a little lighter or a little darker as you go from batch to batch. They wanted everything to be exactly the same and right on. And we're trying to explain to them it doesn't work that way. Didn't matter to them. It had to be right on. So they were pretty demanding in what they were looking for. So you've got to understand those things and learn to deal with them.
So kind of going back when you said that like your turnaround time was like 3 days and theirs was 3 months, did they like
Yes.
take any of that like advice from you guys in terms of like trying to speed the process up?
Nope. Nope. Their way was their way. Just in time to them did not mean I take an order today and I get it to you tomorrow. Just in time meant I will take the order and in 3 months you will get it and it will be complete and right and all that good stuff. And their just in time meant they scheduled it out. And then when it was ready to go, then they had everything in place and boom, they produced it and they were very efficient and effective at it. To us, it was speed, speed, speed. We got the order. Let's do whatever we have to do and get it out today or tomorrow or 3 days or whatever the case may be. Very different concept than what they had of just in time. So we tried to put our own spin on it. It didn't work so well, particularly in dealing with them and with other customers as well. Because to do that, then you were basically killing somebody else's order in order to get out the one that you had just made a commitment on that you were going to get out in a day or two. So it made things very hairy for us. They're very controlled, very planning, and they stick to the plan. We jump plans all the time here.
Were there times where like they said 3 months, but it was done like sooner than that, or was it always like pretty consistent with when it was going to be done?
When they said 3 months, it was 3 months. That was it.
Ah.
Not a day before, not a day later. 3 months, you got it.
Well, at least their standards were the same the entire time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a good thing to have. At least you're like, it is 3 months. So that's good for, I guess, planning purposes.
Yep.
So for someone who doesn't know what a project manager is, how would you describe like what a project manager does?
A project manager, well, they start with helping to define what the project is itself, at least if you're doing it correctly. So somebody may have an idea, let's say that they want to produce a new product. The project manager gets into to determine what that product is, an idea of how it's going to be made, are the processes and equipment and so forth already in place and can be adapted to whatever the new product is, or is going to have to be brand new stuff. How much space is going to be required? What are the production requirements? How are they going to be built up over time? All the aspects are going to be involved in the new product, and then putting the budget together, and then the project team putting a charter together that puts a definition of just what's going to be done and how it's going to be done. And then they take that team that they've identified and assembled, and they work with them in order to get in this case, a new product done and out on time and within budget and so forth. And it could be something else. It could be an IT program where they're putting new software in and they're determining that. So they're getting all the requirements together, they're specifying them, they're getting agreement from everybody, and then they are managing that, whatever it is, that project through to its completion. As things come up that change, or there are needs that occur, sometimes they miss it on the budget. Or things change and things get more expensive. Like today with construction costs have just gone out of sight because of supply shortages and so forth. They have to adapt to those things, and deal with them as they go on. But what the manager is doing is he or she is getting the most out of the people that are involved in the project. They themselves are not physically working on the project, nor should they be. They're managing the people who do and making sure that they understand what they need to do, that they're getting done what they need to get done. And if they have any problems, because they may be working on some other things, or there's a misfortune in their family and they have a child that's sick and they have to be out, or they get involved in that, they have to manage all that stuff to make sure that the project continues despite what might be happening with an individual or a group of folks on the team. So they're really pretty instrumental in making sure that the project is defined and gets done on time, within cost, within time, and to what it's supposed to be at the end. Everybody's satisfied with the end results. It's pretty complex. if you do a good job. If you don't do a good job, then whatever.
I'm sure that comes with like having a good team too behind you, because you know if you yourself can't be like that good leader, you're not going to have a good team.
Ideally, but again, there's weak cogs in everything that we have. There's some people that are better than others, and sometimes you don't get all the personnel that you would like to get. You're given somebody who may not be as strong, and you've got to manage that person a little bit more carefully to make sure that things get done. Ideally, you would have a great team, and you just say go to it, and they would all do what they would needed to do, and everything would be hunky-dory and that. But it doesn't always work that way. And when I'm teaching project management, we talk specifically about difficult people and how you have to handle them and work with them and so forth. And the final case may be if they just don't get it and they don't cooperate, you may have to kick them off the project team and get somebody else. I've had that happen before. So you don't like to have that happen. You hope that everybody understands and will do their best job, but sometimes it just happens.
Is there some truth that out of like all the work that's done, 20% of the people do 80% of the work? Is there some truth to that?
On occasion. On occasion, a project team usually isn't that way. As a true team, they all have the stuff that they need to do. They have their areas of expertise. For instance, if you're in purchasing and you've got an engineer, the engineer is going to do the purchasing part of the job. The purchasing person is going to do it. And similarly, the purchasing person isn't going to get involved in the engineering. So there's divisions of labor and what's expected of each person. They need to do it. Projects, if they're run properly, you don't have that where it all falls on a precious few to get it done. If that happens, then you need to correct it either for that project or for the future. In some cases, I'm sure that can be the case. Okay. In some cases, a lot of the work falls on a particular area. For instance, if it's an IT project, the IT people are going to be more involved than, let's say, logistics or marketing or somebody else like that. So they may have more stuff that needs to be done, but then you've got to have enough resources in there. You can't just have one person that it all falls on. You may need to have 2 or 3 or 4 different people that, again, you're divvying up the work on. So it's more like areas that might have more to do on a particular project than others. Yeah.
What would you define a good leader versus a bad leader?
A good leader, first of all, they let the folks who are following them know exactly what the expectations are. What needs to be accomplished? When does it need to be accomplished by? What are the boundaries surrounding it in terms of budget and so forth? What they need to do and so forth. And then they continue to communicate throughout the project to them. Are they doing a good job? Are there some problems? And if there are, how do they get corrected? If there's any changes to the scope or the budget or, the time frame or whatever the case may be, because sometimes all of a sudden they pull the project in and instead of having 3 months to get it done, you got 2.5 months. And people need to know that, need to have a say in how that happens then, what considerations are necessary. So a good leader does all that. I would say a lot of it is communication, good communication. And also when they're not functioning properly, they need to take that criticism and do something about it. It doesn't just go one way. And good leaders do all of that stuff. And they're fair to the people. They give credit where credit is due. They don't take the credit themselves. It's the team that gets the credit or the individual who's doing stuff. They kind of sit in the background and don't stand up and take all the kudos and neglect the people who did all the work. But similarly, when something goes wrong, they're there to take the blame. They're not pointing the finger at somebody else and saying, well, Joe let us down on this one. The project leader, the manager, they're responsible for everything, and they take the good, but they take the bad also. And I tell that to people who get into management roles. Hopefully you realize that if one of your people screws up, that's on you as well as them. And they kind of give you that look like, huh? Yeah, it goes both ways. You'll get praise when things go right. You're going to get criticism when things go wrong, and you be ready to shoulder that.
So like now going back, like bad leader would be like somebody like who is what?
Excuse me?
Like a bad leader would be somebody who's
a bad leader. All the opposite of what I just said.
Yeah.
They don't communicate well. People are confused as to what their role is. They're not quite sure what the expectations are, what the budget is, how much time they're expected to spend on it or not spend on it. If major changes or even slight changes, sometimes slight changes can be difficult to deal with. They need to know that stuff. And they also need to know that they're doing a good job. That things are going the way they were expected to, or similarly that they're not, and what adaptations they have to make in order to make it go more smoothly. So basically all the opposite of what we just talked about, or some variation of that. But a good leader really has his or her pulse on what's going on, and they're not micromanaging. They're not talking to people every other minute. They give them enough time to do what they need to do, but they're checking in regularly. It's funny, I talk about Project PITAs, PITAs, and I think your listeners probably know what a PITA is. If not, look it up. But sometimes you have to be that, even with the best of people, because we're human and we make mistakes and we take things for granted and we forget things. And the PITA is there to remind people what's necessary and whether they're on target or off target. And if off target, how they're going to get back on target so that things are done correctly and on time. So my class always says, well, you can be a nice PITA. So we compromised on that. You don't have to be a hard nose about it, but you got to let people know that they're accountable for what they do and need to get things done that they signed on for.
If say you're somebody in an organization, but you don't really have like an authority role, maybe you're just starting or you've maybe just been on the team for like 6 months. How do you tell, like you've identified like the person that's in charge is not a great leader. How do you tell that person that they're not being a good leader? Because that's something that could be really hard to do in the sense like you might be fired for like telling them that, but at the same time, they're creating a toxic environment that you're in. So how would you handle that situation?
That can be very difficult. Sometimes I had a terrible boss working at Crayola who basically the vice president who he reported to went around him and went directly to me to get things done. And I would say to the vice president, well, why don't you get rid of them? And it was, well, I made the mistake of hiring them. And sometimes you live with your mistakes, so they work around it. It's not the best of situations, particularly when it's recognized by the people in authority that you don't have a good person there. So it makes it very difficult sometimes because a bad manager or leader can make it very difficult for you to get things done. I would say the best thing to do is to be direct. If it's really not working, you need to be direct with the person. And if they're not going to change, I hate to say it, but at some point you have to make a decision for yourself whether you want to continue to work for that person or not, or seek opportunities elsewhere, as they say, whether within the company or outside of the company. Because a bad leader can really muck things up for people. They can slow things down. They can make, cause you to have additional work, spend time that you don't need to spend. The boss I had, we had a problem. I forget what it was. And I came up with like 5 different ways to deal with it. And he rejected every one of them. And finally I said to him, if you're not going to help me, I said, my job is not to come up with all the possibilities for how to fix this. It's to come up with one we agree on it and move ahead. And if you're not going to help, or you're going to keep throwing roadblocks in my way, then it ain't getting done, plain and simple.
Mhm.
So we had it out on a couple of occasions. I said to him, if you can't help me, then let's not even bother talking anymore. I'll just go do whatever I have to do and get it done. So we did not have a very good relationship. And it was tenuous. I always thought that I might get fired. In fact, the day I got promoted, I got called into the office and I called my wife and said, I may be home early. I think I may be getting fired today, and I wound up getting promoted. So that was the kind of relationship. It was a fine line between promotion and possibly losing my job. And it's tough. It's tough because people don't want to face that, or they're
Mhm.
afraid to face that. They're afraid to lose their job. Sometimes you have to go beyond that and not be afraid of it. You just have to do what you know or feel is right, and you take the consequences for it.
At what point did you know that you wanted to go in business?
I think at an early age, my father
Mhm.
was in business, and I was brought up that way. It was kind of old school that you went to work for a large company and basically you stayed there forever and so forth. Of course, that changed. And particularly nowadays, people don't anticipate staying with the same company like they did for 40 or 50 years. I think the average is 5 years or less that somebody stays with a company before they move on. Um, but I was brought up in that environment by my father, and uh, thought about it. And at one point, I thought working for large companies was the way to go. And boy, I couldn't wait until I was an executive. And then as you get involved, you find out it's not all it's cracked up to be. The
Mhm.
higher up you go, sometimes there's more limitations on you. Um, and then you decide to move on. Sometimes smaller companies are better, or in my case, I started my own company, and then I was able to do some things that I wasn't able to do at Crayola, and have impacts that I wasn't able to have. So you find out, what makes the most sense for you. Some people are very happy with that. They're happy to work for a large company. They feel secure. They like what they're doing, and they like the security, if there's such a thing anymore these days. So for each person, it's a little bit different depending on what your motivation is and what you want to accomplish.
When you're consulting companies and you go in and identify problems,
Yes.
how do you go about identifying what's not working for a company?
Well, the first thing, and it's funny because I'm writing a series right now called What Keeps You Awake at Night. And that was a line I used a lot of times going into a new company to find out what it was they actually wanted to have done. And you would say to the person that you're going to be dealing with, so what is it that keeps you awake at night? What is it that really bothers you that needs to get fixed? So you get that information from the person, but you don't just leave it there, because in some cases, what they're looking at is the symptom and not the actual cause, what we call the root cause. So before I would take an engagement, before I'd even write a proposal, I'd say, I'd like to spend a day, no cost to you. And I want to talk to people, and I want to go around, and I want to get different perspectives. I want to know who's all involved with what we're talking about. And then I'll make a determination what I think really needs to be done, and that'll be in the proposal. We'll talk about it because it's really interesting. In a lot of cases with manufacturing, they would say, the people in the office, oh, those people on the floor, they just don't get it, and they're slow, and they're lazy, and then you find out, you go on the factory floor, and the people are busting their tails, but they're getting bad information from the scheduler or the manager or the expediter, or the materials aren't there on time, or we talked about just in time. All of a sudden, they're working on an order and they say, oh, excuse me, you have to tear that down and start on this because we have this rush for this client. So they tear everything down and they start on the new one, and somebody comes and says, oh, nope, 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 we got a different requirement. We have to do this. So they tear it down again. Well, all that time is wasted when they could have gotten the first order done. All right. But in the meantime, they've torn the line down a couple of times and have gotten absolutely nothing done. And then people are saying, well, you're not accomplishing anything. Well, yeah, because you're giving me bad direction. So I worked on once an order went out and it got completed. Nothing got changed until that order was done. And then you would put the next one in place that you felt was important, because that back and forth and that chaos was just terrible. Or they had poor systems. A lot of companies put in IT systems and they don't work properly, and they're getting bad information out. So the person goes to manufacture whatever it is they need to manufacture, and they find out the wrong parts are there. So now they've got to go and get the correct parts, or they find out that those parts were never ordered. They're not even available. How are they supposed to make something? It's so you find out, well, the problem wasn't on the floor. Yeah, it could be improved. There are things that can always be done. Things can always be improved upon, but that wasn't what the real problem was. So all of a sudden it becomes, instead of a manufacturing productivity problem, it becomes an IT problem. Either the system is no good, or it's not being used correctly, or, information isn't being communicated well, a variety of different things. So all of a sudden it takes a different turn, okay? Because if you work on the floor, and again, they're doing everything they can, and you fix whatever, and they're still having the problem, they look at you and they go, well, you worked really hard, but nothing's changed. We're still having the same issues we did before. Yeah, because we were working on the wrong problem. Okay. We're working on the symptom, not on the real cause.
For a company that wants to expand, what advice would you give them?
One that wants to expand, things will change. The way you're doing things today will not be necessarily the way you will do things in the future. And I think that's the biggest problem for small companies as they continue to grow. When they're small, small group of individuals can keep their hands and their eyes and their ears on everything. But as it gets more complicated and larger, they can't do that. You can't be the individual who's running everything. If you try to do that, you're going to stay small, or you're going to fail at growing and becoming large. So, small companies start off and they have small systems, like they have a Peachtree system for dealing with manufacturing and accounting. Well, they get to a certain point and Peachtree doesn't cut it anymore. It just doesn't have the capability. So now they've got to go to a larger system. They may need new equipment. Capacity is not, you've tapped it out. You had people doing things and semi-automatic equipment, and maybe now you need to go to automatic equipment. You might need to increase the size of the facility. You've just run out of space and you're too cramped in and trying to do too much, and it isn't happening because you just don't have the space that you need. So there's lots of things that need to change, but mostly it's increasing the staff and allowing people then to do their jobs, kind of back to that project management thing again, without you trying to control everything and everything running through an individual or a couple of individuals. Because if that happens, you're not going to grow. You can tell in large companies, president of a very large company, multi-billion-dollar company, does not know what the guy on the factory floor is doing. If he does, that's truly amazing. But by and large, he's lost contact with him. That person's probably 6 levels below him. And there are managers in the factory who are worried about that stuff. The president is worried about what new markets are we getting into, and who are our new customers going to be, and all that stuff. Not about how things get produced on the factory floor and how do we get them out and so forth. They've got a host of people to worry about that.
So turning gears, kind of going back to lessons, what would you say is the hardest lesson a young person has to learn?
They don't have to know everything. And when they don't, they need to find somebody who knows what they don't know and get some education from them, some assistance if necessary, because nobody knows everything and we all need help. And we are a team working together. All right. If you try to take everything on your own shoulders, you will probably fail because you'll turn people off. they'll go, well, why is he trying to do that? That's really not, what his job is, or he doesn't really know what he's doing, or he's doing it wrong. And when people get arrogant about that or defensive, then they turn people off, and then they won't help them, because there's a lot of people out there that will help you if you don't know what you're doing, or ask for assistance. But if you don't, you try to do everything on your own, you go, okay, fine, thinks he knows everything. Let him go to it. He'll learn. I always talk to people. I learned so much from, factory floor people who had all sorts of insights. And all you had to do was ask them, and they would tell you lots of stuff. They love to tell you things, and they wanted to be helpful to you. So I was never afraid to ask questions and get information and so forth. So I think that's number one, is you don't have to know everything. Nobody expects you to, and you shouldn't expect that of yourself. The other thing is to really listen to people. You learn a lot. Not all of it's true. You got to sort things out. Sometimes you get BS by people. They try to test you or have fun with you, or whatever the case may be. So you got to kind of sort it all out. But you know who you can trust and who you can rely on and who you can get good information from. And I always asked, and I would go to multiple people before I made a decision on what it is I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. When I was managing, I always asked my people. I did not stand in front of them and spout off. And I was managing people I had worked with who probably had 20, 30 years experience on me. You want to talk about a difficult situation, you're working with them one day and the next day you're the boss. But we had a great relationship because I respected what they did. I didn't say, well, we have a different relationship now, although we did, because I'm the boss. I mean, at points I had to make decisions that I didn't have to make before, and they had to listen to them. But they knew that I respected them, and I listened to them, and they had great ideas, and I used those ideas, and I gave them credit for it. So it's a learning process. It's definitely a learning process. And the more you learn and the more you allow people to do their thing and do it well, the better off you're going to be, instead of trying to tell them everything that they need to do. Because then they're gonna wait for you to tell them what to do. And if you don't know, then you're going to wait for a long time. So
what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Don't be afraid to make a mistake. I had a boss, and this goes back, so I'll tell you, give you an idea of how old I am, who he would say to me, you know why they put erasers on the end of pencils? We still used pencils at the time. Computers were still kind of a novelty. He'd say, because we all make mistakes. And that was an amazing piece of advice, which is, you're going to make a mistake. When you do, erase it, correct it, move on. The big thing is, don't make a mistake and then leave it for somebody else to clean up. It's your responsibility. You made the mistake, learn from it, okay? Clean it up and then move on, and don't make that mistake again. Use it as a learning experience, and it's not going to be the end of the world. All right? And again, people are there to help you. If you're good and you're conscientious and you work with other folks, they don't want to see you fail. They don't want to see you making mistakes, and they will help you to correct mistakes. So I'd say that was the biggest piece of advice that I think I got, was don't be afraid to do something incorrectly. Just clean it up and move on. And I had a boss, the one boss that I worked for, that's what he said to me. He said, I am going to give you a lot of authority and I'm going to trust you, but don't screw up and don't make me look bad. And it was fair enough. Okay. There was a give and a take there. I'm going to give you the authority to do stuff, but now you've got the responsibility to make sure that it comes out okay. Because if you don't, and I look bad, it goes back to, again, that the manager is the guy who's responsible for everything that goes right and wrong. If something goes wrong, let me know about it and clean it up. And we had that relationship, and it worked out well. And I did. When I did something wrong, I told them. I didn't try to hide it. And then we moved on from there.
What's the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Piece of advice. Well, I don't know if it was advice. It was when I went for help. I was given a project to do where I had to come up with a strategic plan for the manufacturing for the organization. And I didn't know anything about strategic planning and so forth. So again, I reached out to senior managers who all said that they knew. And not one of them could really tell me what to do. One guy said to me, he had come from another company, he goes, all the stuff I have are in boxes in my basement. I don't know which box, the stuff is in. So why don't you just write the plan and then give it to me and I'll review it. And right then and there, I said, this guy's never done a strategic plan, because I always had the work that I did at hand. So I could always reference it, because people would always ask you questions. You'd go back, or you used it to build on other things.
Mm-hmm.
So it told me right off the bat, this guy has no idea what to do. And if I knew how to write the plan, I'd be writing the plan. I wouldn't be talking to him. So I learned at that point that sometimes you have to, you try your best to find out from other people, but if they really don't have answers, then you go and you find out for yourself, and you do some trial and error, and eventually you'll get there. So that's what I learned from that. So I don't know if it was a bad piece of advice that I had, but it was a learning experience that sometimes the people that you think are in the know aren't in the know, and you gotta move on and deal with it. So, but other than that, I can't really think of something. I guess the other thing was, at one point, my manager wanted to do a new operation that I just didn't believe in, and I couldn't get behind it. So I didn't work on it. And that was the one time I had a falling out with the vice president, because he said, how's the project going? And I said, go talk to Bob, because I'm not working on it because it doesn't make sense. And I'm not going to waste my time on something that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And the VP got mad at me, and he said, he said to me, you think you're the smartest guy around here, don't you? And I said, no, but if something doesn't make sense, I'm not going to do it until it makes sense, because that's not what you pay me for, is to work on stupid things. It never got done, because it really didn't make sense to do what they wanted to do. It was a waste of time and money. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you gotta take the blows for that. You got to stand up for what you think is right, and let the cards fall where they're going to fall.
What was the toughest decision you had to make, when either in your career or your business? Was it like just moving from Crayola, or was it starting your company, or?
There were a couple of different things. There were some definite issues that I ran into at Crayola that we had to deal with. Crayon production was at stake because we were having problems with some of the equipment, and there was no place to go. When Crayola can't make crayons, they can't go to somebody else to make crayons for them, because they're it, by and large. And competition certainly wouldn't make it for them anyway. So we had some difficulties there. I would say leaving Crayola was a difficult decision. Starting my own business certainly was. And then that had some issues to it as well, including the lovely years of 2008 and 2009, when the economy kind of went in the tank due to the mortgage crisis, and companies pulled back on their spending. And the first place they pull back is any outside services, of which we were one. So a number of companies stopped doing work with us for a period of time. We had to adapt to that to survive as a company without laying anybody off, which was very interesting to do as well. So you run into different things throughout your career that you just have to deal with. Okay. And you work it through. You do the best job you can. You keep your fingers crossed that everything is going to work out okay. And in our case, it did. And the company is still surviving. They're in their 20th year this year. So a lot of companies can't say that they've lasted years. So a number of different things. I think not one thing that I think stands out. Lots of learning experiences, dealing with some difficult people, dealing with difficult clients, dealing with difficult coworkers, some who do not have your best interests at heart and want to see you fail. So that's always difficult to deal with.
For someone who's just starting out on their journey into business, what books would you recommend them to read? Or books in general, like what books in general related to business?
Well, if you look at some of the most successful people in history, these names might sound foreign to people because they're not the current people, but Jack Welch with GE, who was certainly very successful and ran and grew a great company with General Electric. Lee Iacocca, who was with Ford and then with Chrysler and was the guy who was responsible for saving Chrysler when it was ready to go under. Certainly a brilliant person. I would say today, probably Mark Cuban is probably a good person to follow. Branson with Virgin Airlines, those folks, because they've all been very successful and grown their enterprises. And they're doing well and they're surviving and thriving and so forth. So I'd say there's a variety of different folks out there. Look for the successful people. That's who you want to follow. People who have a history of success and you can point to it and go, yes, they were. Okay. And also, they're very people conscious. They talk a lot about the people. Again, while they were responsible for doing a lot of good things, they had a lot of good people behind them, and they recognize that and say, I couldn't have done this by myself. There were lots of folks who were involved, and we all pitched together in order to make it happen. So I'd say those folks, and of course myself. I got 2 books out there that I think are great books. So.
That's perfect. It follows up to our next question. What inspired you to write your book or books?
Well, the first one, and that's entitled What About the Vermin Problem? As I worked through my career at Crayola, but mostly when I got into consulting, we ran across some strange situations with different clients. And at the end of the project, I would say to my colleague, someday that should be in a book. And yep. But of course, that didn't happen until I kind of retired. And I thought, well, I got time on my hands now. Maybe now it's time to write that book. So I did. I picked 12 situations that I thought were really interesting, and there are probably a bunch more that I could have, but I picked 12 and I started to write about them. And then once I had the book written, I really didn't know what to do with it. I sought out somebody who had done books before, and she helped me to organize, and we got an editor and we kind of reorganized it because she told me the way I went about it was all wrong. I shouldn't have just written this stuff, but I didn't know any better. Mm-hmm. So we did it and finally got it completed and we got it published. But while we were finishing it up, she said to me, well, what about the next book? And I looked at her and I said, well, what about the next book? I didn't have a plan for next book. And she said to me, well, nobody ever writes just one book. Okay, well, you might have met the first person that will. But the more she talked about it, the more I thought, yeah, I think I got another one in me, probably a couple more. But anyway. So I started to think about it. And now we did it the way she did, which is kind of to develop an outline of what we wanted to say instead of just writing it and organize it, put it into the form that we wanted. And that one is influences and influencers. And that one, Well, it was a little bit different than the first one, because the first one dealt with business situations and things that individuals and companies did right or wrong, and the ramifications for it. But I thought about the people in my life that have had an impact beyond just the ones you would expect, like a teacher or your parent and that, but a combination of folks, some instructors and business people and so forth. Like you had asked me about, best advice. And I said, the fellow who said, why do they put razors on the end of pencils? He was also one of the best bosses I ever had, because I would go into him with this great idea, what I thought was a great idea. And he'd go, well, we've tried that once before and it didn't work, but maybe time has passed and maybe things are different, and maybe now it's time to take a look at it again. And what his point was is never thwart somebody from trying to do something. Don't lead them on and say, oh, yeah, it'd be the greatest idea in the world. But let them try it and find out, because it might be a different time and it might be a different circumstance. And if it didn't work out, then I learned something from it. Okay. And maybe the next time I thought about it a little bit more before I ran in with the world's greatest idea. But encourage people to think and to do things and to try things and so forth, and to learn why things didn't work before and how they might work now. But anyway, that person and a lot of other people in my lives affected how I do things and how I think and react and so forth. I thought, well, it's not just me. We probably all have that, and we don't think about it a lot of times. We take it for granted, or we kind of pass it off. But it was to get people to start thinking about who has had an impact on our lives and why we think the way we do, which then kind of leads into the other book, which is why people make some of the decisions they make based on the impacts that they have had in their lives. So you can kind of tie the two together. So I did get that second book out, and they're both doing well. I think they're good things, not just for business, but for life in general, because we have to make decisions and we have people who impact us and influence us. And we make decisions on things that could turn out very well or not so well, depending on the decision that we make. So I think they're just good life lessons without being preachy. And they're very down to earth, easy to read, common sense. And people who've basically read them said, I know somebody just like that person you were talking about. Okay. Or I went through that experience. And boy, I wish I had this information 20 years ago. Well, you didn't have it 20 years ago, but you have it now. So take them so people can relate to it. And I think that's what it is. They're all relatable stories. They're not some pie in the sky thing that was made up or some theory. They're real, actual things that happened. And I describe them as best I can. Granted, they're from my perspective. I'm sure other people that were involved might have a slightly different perspective. But anyway, it is what it is. And yeah. And I continue to write now. Like I said, I'm writing this series about what keeps you awake at night. And I'm going into a variety of things that really bother people and why it bothers them and what they can and should do about it. And I'm just finishing up one right now about friends. I'm caught on this friends thing.
Friends in the workplace?
Friends, period. People called so many people their friend. And to me, a friend is a very specific individual, a special individual, somebody you can count on when things are going bad. When you turn around, you look and there's nobody to be found, you find out that you didn't have as many friends as you thought you did. All right. So it's a small collection of friends. And when you start calling everybody your friend, it kind of dilutes what a friend really is. And that kind of bothers me to a degree. So I'm kind of on my horse right now about what a friend is and wanting to have a friend and who that should be, and how many you should have. How many you're really going to have. Not how many you should have, but how many you're really going to have. So
friends or acquaintances.
Exactly. And there's a big difference between that. I have lots of acquaintances, people I would love to go to a football game with and drink a beer and that. But if I ask them to do something for me, a favor, ain't going to happen. That's not really a friend. Okay. particularly if it's something that's a little distasteful, but even that maybe isn't distasteful, but just you ask for a favor and they're nowhere to be found. They always have an excuse why not. Oh, now's not a good time. When is a good time? Well, they can't tell you. Well, so whatever.
Tell me something that other people value that you don't.
Other people value that I don't. I think that wealth. I think you get to a point where how much money do you really need to have? All right. I'm not the wealthiest person in the world. I'm not the poorest person in the world, but I live a very comfortable lifestyle. Myself and my wife and my family, we provided well for them. We weren't extravagant. We didn't live beyond our means. We lived within our means. Sometimes maybe we could have been a little bit more extravagant, but we weren't. But we never got ourselves into a financial difficulty. And there's some people where that's their whole driving force in life is how many dollars they can accumulate. Well, why? I mean, at what point can you not eat any better than you're already eating? Okay. Or go to places. I mean, so many places are accessible these days and financially affordable to do that, except for Disney World, which gets crazier and crazier all the time. Yeah. I could talk for a while about Disney World. I have a problem with them right now. But anyway, so, when that becomes a paramount thing, then I think that you've misplaced where your values are at. And I see too much of that. And I see society lauding too many people for their wealth as opposed to really, in a lot of cases, I found that they're very shallow people and they have very terrible relationships, particularly with their family. Where they're alienated from their family because they spent all their time working. There's that old saying, nobody ever said on their dying breath, I wish I had 10 more minutes to spend in the office, as opposed to I wish I had 10 more minutes to spend with my family. I think that's really what's important. So I think to some degree I think too much emphasis is placed on it. And again, like I said, I'm comfortable. I live a decent lifestyle. There's nothing I can think of that I want that I can't get or don't have already. We just went through Christmas and I said, what do you want? And I said, nothing really. I mean, everything is fine. We get what we want when we want it and we're doing fine. So I would say that would be something for me.
What is your life purpose and when did you know you found it?
I think it's to take care of my family. I think that's a very big thing in life. If you're going to have a family, then it's your responsibility to nurture them and provide the guidance and get them off to a good start and to be there even when they're in their adult years, because they still kind of need you. And they still want to talk to you. You still have good advice. Talk to my children quite a bit about professional stuff and what my thoughts are and how I would approach certain things. Or I was just helping my daughter redo her resume. She's looking to change jobs, and we went through that. So I think that's pretty cool that she asked me to do that and to spend time with her. Talk with my oldest son who's going through a bunch of stuff. He's changed job careers and so forth, and how you manage everything and the family and so forth. And I think helping other people. I think we all have an obligation to do that. We are a community. We live with other people. And the more we can help people out and help, not in the sense of giving them money and things, but advice and maybe direction and to some degree. I mean, I contribute, and my wife and I contribute to different causes that help people that are in need, because we all need a hand, but it's not where it's perpetual need where they're on it forever. It's just that hand up, to get them going again until they're in a good place. It's that old thing about give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. It's that kind of philosophy. And that's what I'm trying to do. And that's why I've gotten into teaching. I like to impact younger people and provide some of the knowledge I have, and hopefully that will help them as they get into their professional careers. So I would say those are the big things. Just live a good life, be a good citizen. Don't do anything that's going to purposely hurt somebody. Sometimes you do it unintentionally. Again, you correct it. But if you're doing it purposefully, then I think that's wrong. So I would say that's kind of where I think I'm at in life. And I think I'm doing a decent job of it. Could always be better, but I'm working on it.
If there's one person you could meet that's living today, who would it be? And then one person that is no longer with us that you could meet today, who would it be and why?
One person today. Ooh. Oh, there's a variety of people, but one person who's on my mind right now is I was just watching the college football championship the other night, and the coach for Alabama, Nick Saban, is an interesting individual.
Yeah,
the success that he's had, the people that he's impacted, how just year after year he's got this tremendous number of talented people who want to be by him, and he brings out the best in them. And this year, I mean, they had a tremendous number of injuries on that team, and they still were playing for the championship. And up to the fourth quarter, they were in the lead. Was tremendous. He'll probably go down as the greatest college football coach in history. And I would just like to spend time with him and see how he operates and so forth, and how he deals with his people, because he stays in touch with them after they graduate. It's one thing to have, people under your jurisdiction when they have to be as players, but after they leave, they come back because he's had such an impact, and they're asking his advice and so forth. So I think that's pretty inspirational. Asked a number of folks, but if I think person who had an impact on me was past president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. He had a way of communicating with people. In fact, they called him the great communicator. He always had a calm disposition, even when there were tragedies. I remember when the Challenger space shuttle exploded, and he went on the air to talk about it, and it was just so calming in the fact that there was this tragedy going on, and yet he was assuring people that everything was going to be okay, but at the same time showing his respect for the people who died and the grief that we all had. Just to get a sense for how he operated and what experiences he had to get him to where he was at, and how he could maintain that calm demeanor regardless of the circumstances that were going on. I'm sure behind the scenes, it wasn't always as calm, and he would get angry and so forth. But when he was out in public, he was a very calm person. Even when he was angry, it wasn't the kind of anger you see where, you're stomping your feet and banging on the table and so forth. Certainly, that was, a person. I guess another person would be Lincoln, how he dealt with the Civil War and trying to keep a country together, and the issues he had to deal with. And he was not a popular president. He is today, but he wasn't back then.
Wasn't back then, no, not at all.
No, yeah. They called him all sorts of names and lampooned him and so forth. And yet he didn't let it get to him. And he knew what he had to do, and he did it. So I'd certainly love to be able to talk to him. And there's other folks, but I would say those are some that stick out.
What advice would you, like, now that you're, gone through life and been through different experiences, what advice would you give to your teenage self?
To my teenage self?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, quite honestly. Um, I think every choice that I've made has worked out well. Some by design, some not so by design. Uh, I would say maybe to really show more appreciation to the folks who helped me when they helped me. I think about it more now than at the time. And if I had one regret, it would be that I don't think I I was as appreciative in how I dealt with them or what I said or so forth. And thinking back now about how they helped me, I probably should have been. So I think if I told my teenage self, I would say realize who really are people who are looking out for you, who want to help you, and make sure that you let them know just how much you appreciate what they're doing and how valuable it is in whatever case that may be. Not by giving them things, but by just letting them know, because that's what they're doing it for. They're not doing it for things; they're doing it because they really want to help you.
Mhm.
And then pass it forward. As much as I'm trying to do it, I'm sure there's more I could do, and I'm doing it a little bit later in life. Maybe do it a little bit sooner. But I would say those things. Just be more cognizant about what's going on around you and be appreciative of it.
Final question. What
Okay.
does it take to live an uncommon and extraordinary life?
I think a common life is you just kind of go along with the flow. You don't make waves. You don't speak up. And you don't take chances. All right. You always try to take the safe route, the sure route. Uh, because when you do that, and I've seen too many people that have regrets then, because they say, I'm not really where I want to be. I would have liked to have done this or that. Well, why didn't you? And because they didn't take a chance, they didn't reach out. So I would say that's kind of the common. The extraordinary are the people who do take chances. There's lots of shows on right now that I watch, particularly on History Channel, about business moguls or people in the food industry or the toy industry and the chances they took and how they went against what people were telling them to do or not to do. And they made big successes, and they had failures along the way. And it wasn't, they decided to do it and everything was hunky-dory and it just went well. They had to fight for where they were at and to get through what they got through. And that truly made them extraordinary. And things that we take for granted today, back in the day, they weren't there. They, in 100 years, which is not much in the history of mankind, the changes that have occurred because those people took chances and they made better lives for all of us. They allowed us to have things that weren't there before. Particularly in food. Food was terrible back in the early 1900s, 1930s, and so forth. The safety requirements and people who realized that and made food better for us, or the advances we have in technology. We take TVs and refrigerators and computers and things for granted. But they haven't been around that long in the whole scheme of things in the history of mankind. And they were because there were people who were visionaries who said, I'm going to do this. We need this. And I'm not quite sure how to get there, whether the technology is there or not, but they got it started. And then the next person is able to build on it and build on it and build on it. So I say those are the extraordinary people. And then there are some that are behind the scenes that fall between the common and the extraordinary. You don't hear about them, but they're doing a lot of great things. people who are out there helping other people. There was a person in the Lehigh Valley who ran a bunch of social service programs, and he and I were very much different in our political views. I'm more to the conservative side. He's more to the liberal, but he was so dedicated and genuine to what he was doing. And we just had a great relationship. And I was able to provide some services to him to help things along and to help people with feeding people and housing people and so forth. We had different viewpoints about how to make that happen, but we worked together on the grounds that we could. To me, he's a very successful person. And he would say to me at one time, it's a shame that in this country we have to do some of the things we do. And I said, yeah, but thank God we have people like you who are doing it. Because could you imagine if we didn't? And he kind of stopped and thought about it for a minute. And that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That we have people like that who dedicate their lives to helping other people and to making things better and moving things along. So I'd say those are the differences between the common and the extraordinary or the extraordinary individuals.
Well, I want to thank you for joining the podcast today. Definitely a wealth. You were a wealth of knowledge for my viewers, myself, just everything in general. And I'm excited. At some point, I'm gonna get your books. They definitely, even based off those podcasts, there's definitely a lot more in those books, knowledge wise, that I would love to hear about and staying connected. Yes. I want to thank again you for joining, all my viewers for listening. How can the viewers kind of follow you if they want to hear more?
Okay, well, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn site. So if you go to Peter Christian on LinkedIn, and it's a fairly common name, Christian is a fairly common name, but if you see me under adjunct professor, author, consultant, okay, that's who I am. So you can certainly follow me there, and I blog a lot of stuff, a lot of the articles that I write. I have a website that was set up primarily because of my books, but it also does some stuff about my speaking and consulting and so forth. And that's Pete. So it's Peter without the R, PeteChristianBooks.com. And there's a place on there you can send me a note if you want to connect and let me know, and then we can connect either through email or phone or so forth. And then the third is my email address, which is my initials PH and then my last name Christian and the number 53 at gmail.com. So if you connect on any one of those three, let me know who you are, what's on your mind, what you would like to discuss, or whatever the case may be, or how I could be of assistance to you. Certainly get in touch with me and let me know.
Alrighty. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening, and I hope to see you guys next time on my channel.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.